Elias Boone was 17, and the town of Ash Grove, Kansas had a word for him. Simple, you could see him on the loading dock most any morning, a cracked school slate on his knee, chalking columns of numbers while grown men laughed past him. He didn't look up. He didn't flinch. The men made their jokes, and Elias made his sums, and the sums were always right, though nobody thought to check. That autumn, the elevator manager waved him off in front of a dozen waiting farmers. "That boy can't count his own fingers," Cyrus Dunmore said, loud enough to carry. "Let him watch the scale. Keeps him quiet." 12 men chuckled. The boy kept chalking. But Elias had already noticed the one thing no grown man in that county had. The empty wagons never weighed the same twice. If you believe respect is earned in silence, this story is for you. Before we go on, if a story like this is why you're here, subscribe and tell me in the comments the town or county you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now, let me take you to Ash Grove. It was the autumn of 1931, and the third year the price of wheat had gone the wrong way. You have to understand what that did to a place like Ash Grove. The land was still there. The wheat still came up gold in June and went down under the binders in July, same as it always had. But the number a bushel fetched had fallen through the floor and kept falling, and no amount of good weather could fix a bad market. Men who had farmed all their lives, and their fathers before them, sat at their kitchen tables at night with a pencil and a sheet of paper and could not make the figures come out. It was that kind of year. It was that kind of town. The elevator stood at the edge of Ash Grove where the rail spur came in. Meridian Grain and Storage Company, the sign said, tall white letters on a tall gray building. And it was the only place for 30 miles a farmer could sell what he grew. Every wagon of wheat in the county passed across its platform scale. Every dollar the county earned passed through Cyrus Dunmore's hands on the way. That was a thing worth remembering. The whole county's harvest weighed on one beam, tallied by one man. Elias came to that elevator most mornings with his father. Amos Boone farmed a half-section northwest of town, wheat and a little corn, and he hauled his own crop in an old truck that coughed and settled and had to be coaxed up the ramp. Elias rode in the bed. He liked it back there. He liked the wind and the dust and the way the town came up slow out of the flat, the water tower first, then the elevator, then the low roofs. He never said much on the ride. Elias never said much anywhere. But he watched everything, and he forgot nothing, and if you had known to look, you'd have seen his lips moving as the wagons passed, counting, "Here is the thing the town got wrong about the boy." They thought quiet meant empty. It was the opposite. Elias was so full of figures there wasn't room left over for talk. Ask him a question and he'd go still, and the stillness would stretch, and the men would nudge each other and grin, because to them the silence was the proof. Slow, they'd say. Simple, poor Amos, they'd say, a good man saddled with a boy like that. And Elias would stand there and take it, because he could not, for the life of him, find the words to say what he was. But he could carry water. He did that without being asked, every single day. When a team of horses stood sweating in the sun waiting their turn at the scale, Elias would find the bucket and fill it at the pump and carry it down the line, and let each horse drink and stroke its neck while it did. He knew the teams. He knew which mare would nip and which gelding leaned into your hand. And he knew the men's children too, every one, by name and by age. He'd ask after them, in his few flat words, "How's little Ruth? Is the baby walking yet?" And the fathers would answer, half embarrassed, because it unsettled them that the simple boy remembered what they'd told him once, a year ago, in passing, and they had forgotten they'd said it at all. That was Elias. He gave water to horses that couldn't thank him, and kept the names of children who'd never know he carried them. And in the spare minutes he chalked his slate for the pure pleasure of it. Sums and sums and sums. The way another boy might whittle or whistle. The numbers were company to him. They behaved. They never laughed. There was one person in Ash Grove who knew what that boy was, and her name was Ada Pruitt. Ada taught the school. The young teacher, not 30 yet, come from the eastern part of the state to a town that hadn't expected to like her and did anyway. Elias had been her pupil for 1 year before his father pulled him out to work. It was a short year, but something happened in it that Ada never forgot. It was near the end of a term, and the school's account book had gotten into a snarl. Months of figures, the coal money and the slate money and the little the county sent, all tangled up so the columns wouldn't reconcile no matter how she added them. Ada had stayed after the others left, bent over the book by the last light, and she was near tears with the tedium of it. And Elias, who had been sweeping, set down the broom and came and looked over her shoulder at the page. He was quiet a while. Then he told her where the mistake was. Not by pointing, by memory. He'd seen the page once, at the start, and he told her that a figure 3 months back had been carried wrong, a 4 written as a 9, and if she'd fix that one number, the whole thing would come right. She fixed it. It came right. And then, because she didn't quite believe what she'd seen, she asked him to add the whole year's coal money, the 14 entries, in his head. He looked at the ceiling a moment. He gave her the total. She added it herself with the pencil, twice, and both times it matched him to the cent. Ada sat back in her chair that evening and looked at the boy the town called Simple, and she thought, my God, there is something in this child I have never seen in a grown man. She tried to tell people. She tried, gently, more than once. And every time, the answer came back the same, kind and final and blind. Boy's good with chalk is all. She said as much to Amos Boone himself one market morning that autumn. She'd caught him by the truck while Elias filled his buckets down the line. Mr. Boone, she said, your son balanced the entire school's account book in a single afternoon. In his head. I want you to know that. It isn't nothing. Amos was a decent man worn thin by 3 bad years, and he heard her, and he shrugged. He looked over at his boy carrying water to the Hollis team, and something crossed his face that was half love and half shame, and the shame won, the way it had been winning for a while. Boy's good with chalk is all, he said. Can't say 2 sentences to a neighbor. Can't hardly tell a man good morning. He turned back to the truck. Chalk don't pay the note, Miss Pruitt. And there it was, the thing that sat on Amos Boone's chest like a stone. The note. Cattlemen's and Farmers' Trust held the paper on the Boone place. $610, due by the first frost, and the first frost that year was maybe 19 days off. You could feel it coming in the mornings. Amos had brought in a fair crop. Not a great one, but fair. Enough that by his own arithmetic at the kitchen table he ought to have cleared the note with a little to spare. And then he'd hauled it to the elevator and sold it, load by load across the season, and when he added up what Meridian had paid him, it came up short. Not by a fortune, but by enough. Enough that $610 was a mountain now instead of a hill. And he could not for the life of him say where the money had gone. Poor grain, Dunmore told him. Heavy dockage this year, the dirt and the chaff running high. Amos had nodded and taken his check. What else could a man do? There was one scale. There was one buyer. You took the number the beam gave you and you went home. Now let me tell you how that scale worked, because the whole of this story turns on it. And it's simpler than the men who ran it wanted you to think. A loaded wagon pulled onto the platform. The beam gave the gross weight, everything together, wheat and wagon and all. Then the wheat was tipped into the pit, and the empty wagon weighed again, and that was the tare. Gross minus tare gave you the net, the weight of the grain alone. Then Dunmore docked for dockage, a deduction for the dirt and weed seed and broken chaff mixed in. So a man was paid only for clean wheat. Divide the clean net by 60, because a bushel of wheat is 60 pounds, and multiply by the day's price, and that was your money. Gross, tare, dockage, bushels, dollars, every farmer in the county lived and died by those 5 numbers, and every one of those 5 numbers came off a beam that one man read and one man wrote down. Elias had been watching that beam for 2 years. Market day came, the big one, the last real haul before frost, and half the county rolled into Ashgrove with the last of the wheat. The line of wagons stretched back from the platform along the spur and out onto the road. Dust hung over the whole yard. Men stood in clumps talking low about prices and rain and the bank. And up on the platform, in his shirt sleeves with his book, stood Cyrus Dunmore. Dunmore was a heavy, easy man in his 50s, gray at the temples, with a way of smiling that never reached his eyes. He'd run the Meridian elevator 11 years. He had plans, though nobody knew them yet. He had his eye on the old Wheeler place, the best watered quarter in the township, and a notion of buying it and stepping back from trade and living out his days a gentleman, tipping his hat on the church steps, a man of property. That took money, more money than an honest elevator manager's wage would ever throw off. Dunmore had found where the extra came from, and it came a few pounds at a time, off the top of every wagon that crossed his platform. And it had been coming for years. Elias climbed up onto the loading dock that morning with his slate, the way he always did, and settled in his corner out of the traffic and began to write. Nobody paid him any mind. That was the point of him, to Dunmore. A harmless fixture. Furniture that carried water. But this time, one of the buyers up from the city didn't know the local furniture. And when Elias's slate got a little into the walkway, the man shooed him with the back of his hand like you'd shoo a dog. Off the platform, boy. Go on. This is business. Elias gathered his slate and moved. He didn't argue. He never argued. He just moved down a foot and kept his eyes on the beam. And then his own father came up the ramp with the first load, saw him there, saw the buyer frown. And something in Amos snapped tight. Elias, low and hard, go wait by the truck. The boy looked at him. Go on now, you're in the way. Quit embarrassing us and go sit by the truck. And Elias got up, and went, and sat on the running board of the old truck in the sun, and if it hurt him you would not have known it, because his face did the thing it always did, which was nothing. But he could still see the platform from there. And he kept counting. Dunmore weighed load after load through the long morning. Gross, tare, dockage, and the number in the book, and the check written out, and the next wagon up. The line crept forward, and every so often, when a man complained that his check ran light, Dunmore would spread his hands and shake his head sadly and say the same thing. Poor grain this year, friend. Heavy dockage. Market's cruel. And the man would fold his check and drive off. Because what was the alternative? There was one scale. There was one buyer. Then it came Tom Wheeler's turn. Old Tom Wheeler was 70 if he was a day, and he'd farmed that township his whole life, the same quarter Dunmore had his eye on, though Tom didn't know that yet. He'd brought in a good crop. Anyone could see it in the wagon. Clean, bright wheat, hardly a weed seed in it, the best a bad year could give. Tom sat up on the box, proud of it, an old man with a good load, maybe the last good load of a long life. And Dunmore weighed it, and figured it, and wrote out the check and handed it up. You could see the old man's face change. He looked at the paper a long moment, as if the light was bad. Then he looked at it again. And the color went out of him. It was so much less than he'd counted on. It was so much less than a crop like that should bring, that for a second the whole platform went quiet watching him, and old Tom Wheeler, 70 years old in front of half the county, put the back of his hand to his mouth and his eyes filled, and he did not trust himself to speak. Now, Tom, Dunmore said, gentle as poison, loud enough for all of them. I know it's hard. But the grain came in heavy on the dockage and light on the test. It's the year, Tom. It's not the scale. He said it kindly. He said it so kindly. And the farmers standing around shifted their feet and looked at the ground. Because there, but for the grace of God, and because a man weeping is a hard thing to watch, and because down deep every one of them wondered the same about his own check and was afraid to say it. And into that silence a flat voice said, from over by the rail, the scale's wrong. It was Elias. He'd come up off the running board without anyone noticing and stood himself at the platform rail, slate under his arm, and he said it plain, no heat in it, the way you'd say the sky's blue. The scale's wrong. For a heartbeat, nobody laughed. Then somebody did. And then it broke over the whole platform, a wave of it, relief mostly, glad of anything to break the sorrow of the old man's face. The simple Boone boy. The scale's wrong, says the boy who can't count his fingers. Dunmore laughed loudest of all, threw his head back and laughed, because there was no gift the man could have been handed better than this. The town idiot standing up to say the very thing that if a smart man said it would have to be answered. Now it was a joke. Now it was proof of nothing but the boy's condition. There, you hear that, Tom? Dunmore wiped his eye. The scale's wrong. Elias Boone says so. More laughter. Well now, if the boy'll just tell me by how much, I'll fix it directly. He turned to the crowd, playing to it. That boy can't count his own fingers, and he's come to audit my platform. He waved a hand at two of his yardmen. Walk him off, boys. Go on, Elias, out to the road. Water the horses. That's a good lad. Leave the numbers to the men. And they walked him off. Not rough. They didn't need to be rough. Two grown men, one at each shoulder, and the boy went, because he always went, down the ramp and out across the yard to the road, and behind him the platform was still chuckling, and old Tom Wheeler was folding his terrible check into his pocket with a hand that shook. And Amos Boone stood by his wagon and did not go to his son, and stared at the boards of the platform, and wished, God help him, that the boy had just stayed by the truck. That was the loudest the town ever laughed at Elias Boone. Remember it. Because the boy they walked to the road that morning had, in the 2 hours he'd sat on that running board, memorized the gross, the tare, and the net of every single wagon that crossed Cyrus Dunmore's scale. And he was right. The scale was wrong. And he was the only soul in the county who could prove it. He couldn't say it, though. That was the trap of him, the whole cruel shape of it. The harder they pressed, the deeper he went into himself. Push Elias and he didn't push back. He went quiet, and the quiet looked like nothing, and the nothing looked like proof. He knew the scale was wrong the way you know your own name. But knowing and saying were two different countries to him, and he had never once found the road between them. Except there was one person he could talk to, and she found him that evening. Ada Pruitt had been in the yard that morning, come to buy flour, and she'd seen the whole thing. She'd seen them walk the boy to the road. And that evening, after school, she drove her little buggy out the northwest road to the Boone place, and she found Elias at the edge of the yard by the pump, cleaning tack in the last of the light. Alone, she didn't ask him if he was all right. She knew better. She sat down on the upturned bucket across from him, and she said, Elias, this morning. All those wagons that crossed the scale before they walked you off. She kept her voice easy. Do you remember them? And the boy who could not tell a neighbor good morning looked up at his old teacher, and for her, only for her, the road between the two countries opened. Yes, he said. Would you tell me? And he told her. He set down the bridle he was cleaning, and he looked at some middle distance over her shoulder, and he began to recite. Not the checks. The weights. The raw numbers off the beam, the way he'd read them all morning. First wagon, he said, and gave the gross to the pound, and the tare, and the net. Second wagon, gross, tare, net. Third, he went through them one after another. 9 wagons, flat and steady and sure, and Ada Pruitt sat on that bucket in the falling dark, with her heart going like a hammer. Because she had brought a pencil and a scrap of paper, and she was writing it all down as fast as her hand would go. 9 wagons. Every number. When he finished, he picked the bridle back up and went on cleaning it. Done. As if he'd told her the weather. Now Ada had one more thing in her bag, and it was the thing that turned the whole night over. She'd stopped by the Wheeler place on her way out, on a hunch she couldn't have named, and old Tom, still shaken, still stunned, had shown her his ticket from that morning. The terrible check and the weights written on the back. Gross, tare, net, in Dunmore's own hand. She had it in her pocket. And in the list Elias had just given her, one of those 9 wagons was Tom Wheeler's. She found it on her scrap of paper. She held Tom's ticket up to the last light and read Dunmore's net. And then she read Elias's net, the number the boy had carried in his head all day and just now spoken out loud, and they didn't match. Elias's net was higher. Not by much. By a few pounds. The gross was the same, near enough. But the tear, the weight Dunmore had recorded for Tom's empty wagon, was heavier on the ticket than the number Elias had read off the beam. And a heavier tear means a smaller net, means fewer bushels, means less money, every time, always in the elevator's favor. Ada sat very still. "Elias," she said, "the empty wagons, when Mr. Dunmore weighs them empty. The tear." She chose the words carefully, the way you'd step on ice. "Is the tear ever wrong?" The boy's hands stopped on the leather, and he said the thing he'd noticed 2 years ago and had never once found a person to tell. The empty wagons never weigh the same twice. She waited. "Tom Wheeler's wagon," Elias said, "empty, weighs 1140. It always weighs 1140. I know it." He said it without pride, the way he said everything, a plain fact set down on the table. This morning the book said 1181. But it weighed 1140. The beam said 1140. I saw it. He wrote 1181. He looked at her. That's 41 pounds. Tom got paid for 41 pounds less than he brought. And it's not just Tom, it's most of them. The tear's always high. And the dockage is always round. He always rounds the dockage up. Never down. Not once. 2 years, and not once down. Ada Pruitt understood then what she was holding, and it frightened her, and it lit her up like a struck match, both at once. Do you see what the town had done? Do you see it? They had a boy among them who could hold the honest weight of every wagon in his head, who had watched the scale for 2 years the way a hawk watches a field, who had seen the whole shape of the theft laid out plain, tear drifting high, dockage rounding up, always one direction, always the house. The perfect witness. The one mind in the county built to catch exactly this. And they had spent 2 years teaching him to keep his mouth shut, walking him to the road, laughing him quiet. Because he couldn't say good morning to a neighbor. The very thing that made him unable to defend himself was the thing that made him unable to lie. Elias didn't have an angle. Elias didn't have a grudge. Elias couldn't have made up a number if you'd paid him. He only knew what was true, down to the pound. And the town had decided that the boy who only knew what was true was the boy not worth listening to. Ada could say good morning. Ada could write. And that night at the Boone's kitchen table by the lamp, while Amos sat across the room not understanding and half afraid, Ada Pruitt did the thing Elias could not. She put it in writing. She took his 9 wagons and Tom Wheeler's ticket, and she wrote out, in a clean schoolteacher's hand, the honest weight beside the paid weight, the gap between them. Wagon by wagon. It filled a page. And it was only one morning. One morning out of 2 years. Amos watched from across the room. "What's this?" he said finally. "What are the 2 of you at?" Ada looked up. "Mr. Boone, your son can tell you the empty weight of every wagon that's crossed that scale this fall. And Mr. Dunmore has been recording them heavy. Every one. He's been paying the county for less wheat than it grows, and keeping the difference." She laid her hand flat on the page. "This is your note, Mr. Boone, right here. This is where your $610 went. It didn't vanish. It was taken. And your boy is the only one who saw." Amos Boone looked at the page a long time. Then he looked at Elias, and you could see him wanting to believe it. Wanting it so bad his hands shook. Because if it was true, then he wasn't a failure. Then the arithmetic at his kitchen table hadn't lied. Then the farm could be saved. And you could see the other thing, too. The 2 bad years. The whole town laughing on the platform that very morning. The boy who couldn't tell a neighbor good morning. Figures, Amos said. Lo, figures from that boy. Against Cyrus Dunmore. He shook his head slow. They'll laugh us clean off the county, Ada. They already have. You saw them today. He got up and turned away from the lamp. Boy's good with chalk. That's all it'll ever be to any man that matters. Good with chalk. But something had changed in Elias that night. And it wasn't loud. Nothing about Elias was ever loud. It was just that for the first time, somebody had asked him for the numbers instead of laughing at them. And that was enough. He decided, in his quiet way, without a word to anyone, that he would write it all down. Not to fight Dunmore. Elias didn't think in fights. He would write it down because it was true. And true things ought to be written, the way a wrong number in an account book ought to be fixed. That simple. That was the whole of his plan, if you could call it a plan. A boy would sit on a dock and write down what was true. The next market day he did exactly that. He came early, before the line built up, and he took his corner on the loading dock, slate on his knee, and this time he'd brought a second thing. A stub of extra chalk and a plan for the slate. He drew a line down the middle. On the left side, as each wagon crossed, he wrote the honest weights, the ones he read off the beam and totaled in his own head, faster than Dunmore could write them in his book. Gross, tear, net, on the right side, when the check was handed up and a man read his number aloud, or when Dunmore called it to his clerk. Elias wrote the paid weights, left side true, right side paid. Side by side, all day long. Nobody stopped him. Why would they? It was just the simple boy chalking his slate again, harmless furniture that carried water. Dunmore glanced at him once, saw the slate, and smiled his smile that didn't reach his eyes, and thought nothing of it. Because what could a slow boy's scribble ever be to a man like him? That was Dunmore's whole world, that certainty. He could not conceive. He was constitutionally unable to conceive that the mind he'd been mocking for 2 years was the one mind reading his fraud right off the beam. His contempt was so complete, it was a kind of blindness. And it was that blindness, and nothing else, that let a boy sit 4 feet away and copy down the evidence that would end him. Wagon after wagon, all through that long market day, Elias filled his slate. And the 2 columns told one story, and the story was always the same. On every ticket, the gap was there. Roughly 4 pounds shorted on every hundredweight of grain, the tare padded, the dockage rounded up. Always the house, never the farmer. 4 pounds a hundredweight doesn't sound like theft. It sounds like rounding. It sounds like a bad year. That was the beauty of it, the reason no one had ever caught it. It was too small to see on any single ticket, and too steady to be anything but on purpose. You could only see it if you could hold every wagon in your head at once and lay them side by side. One boy in Kansas could do that. By afternoon his slate was full, both sides, top to bottom. The whole day's honest reckoning against the whole day's paid lie. And Elias sat looking at it, and the numbers were as plain to him as a face. He wasn't angry. I want you to understand that about him. He never got angry. He just knew, the way he knew his name, that a wrong figure had been carried down a long, long column, and it wanted fixing. Then, near the end of the day, when the line had thinned and the light came low and gold through the big elevator doors, Elias got up to fill a horse's bucket, and his path took him past the open door of Dunmore's office. And there in the corner, stacked neat, he saw them. The test weights. Every scale in the state got checked, once a year, against a set of sealed standard weights. Iron blocks certified true by the state, kept in a locked case, brought out for the yearly test. Meridian sets stood in the office corner, 5 of them, 50 pounds each, with the little lead state seals on them. And beside the stack, Dunmore had left the beam scale's own poise and a smaller counterbeam he used to check the platform. The way a man might true up his own work between the state's visits. Elias stopped in the doorway. He looked at the sealed weights. He looked at the beam. And in his head, the way another man might feel a chill, he did the arithmetic of it. He knew what the platform beam read. He knew, to the pound, what it read on empty wagons whose true weight he carried in his memory. And he looked at those 5 sealed 50-pound state standards, 250 pounds of certified iron, honest as the day, and he understood, standing in that doorway with an empty water bucket in his hand, that if you set those true weights on that beam, the beam would not come to level. The weights were right. The beam was wrong. Not the tear a man could pad by hand, not a number fudged in a book. The beam itself, the heart of the whole scale, the thing every farmer in the county trusted with his living, had been set off true, tipped a hair in the house's favor, so that even an honest reading was a lie. And the proof of it sat right there in the corner, sealed by the state of Kansas. 250 pounds of iron that would not balance against Cyrus Dunmore's beam. Elias stood very still. From out on the platform came Dunmore's easy laugh and the clank of the beam and a farmer's low thanks for a check that had just robbed him. The boy the whole town called Simple looked at the sealed weights in the corner and at the crooked beam beyond the door. And he understood the last piece of it, the piece that turned padding and rounding into something a man could go to prison for. He turned and filled his bucket at the pump and carried the water down the line to a thirsty team and stroked the mare's neck while she drank and said not one word to a living soul. But his slate was full and the weights would not balance. And somewhere off east, a man named Harlan Voss was oiling his wagon for the fall certification round, and the truth had found, at last, the one witness in the county who could not be laughed off the platform. It was only a matter now of getting a grown man of standing to look at a slow boy's slate. And that, as Elias Boone was about to learn, was the hardest arithmetic of all. Ada Pruitt took the slate to the county attorney on a Tuesday. She wore her good coat. She had copied every figure into a clean tablet the night before, in her schoolteacher's hand, so that no man could say the numbers were a boy's scrawl. She sat in the outer office for an hour. Then she was let in. His name was Coulter. He had soft hands and a watch chain and a way of not quite looking at a person while they talked. She laid it all out. The 9 wagons. The tears that drifted high. The dockage always rounded up, always the same way, always toward the house. Tom Wheeler's own ticket, 41 pounds off on a single load. She spoke plain, and she spoke slow, and she did not hurry, because she had practiced. When she finished, Coulter smiled. "And who worked all this out?" he asked. She had known the question was coming. She had dreaded it. "Elias Boone," she said. The smile widened. He set the tablet down on his desk like a thing that might soil his fingers. "The Boone boy," he said. "The simple one." "He is not simple, Miss Pruitt." He leaned back. "I've known Cyrus Dunmore 11 years. He runs the cleanest scale between here and the county line. You're asking me to take figures, from a boy who was pulled out of your own school because he couldn't keep up." He tapped the tablet. "This is chalk. Cyrus Dunmore is a certified elevator with a bond and a ledger. You see the trouble. I see that a man is stealing from every farmer in this township. I see a schoolteacher who's grown fond of a slow child." He said it kindly, which was worse. "Go home, Miss Pruitt. Teach your school. Leave the grain trade to the men who understand it." She took the tablet back. She did not thank him. She walked out into the cold with the whole proof under her arm and no one in the county willing to read it. That was the shape of it, in those days. The truth existed. It sat there, exact to the pound. And it might as well have been written in smoke, because the mind that held it belonged to a boy the whole town had already decided was worth nothing. Word travels in a small place. By Friday, Cyrus Dunmore had heard. He heard that the schoolteacher had gone to Coulter with a story about his scale. He heard it came from the Boone boy. And Cyrus Dunmore, standing at his platform beam with a farmer's wagon rolling up the ramp, threw back his head and laughed until he had to wipe his eyes. "That boy," he said to no one and everyone. "That boy counting his fingers on my dock, and they think he's found me out." He shook his head. He was almost fond of it. Let him watch the scale. Keeps him quiet. And there it was, the very thing that would hang him. Because Cyrus Dunmore could not imagine, not for one breath, that the mind he mocked was the sharpest instrument in the county. Contempt has a blindness all its own. He looked at Elias Boone and saw a broom that could carry water. He let the boy stay on the dock. He let him keep his slate. He never thought to wonder what the slate was for. So Elias watched. And Elias wrote. He came each market day and sat where he always sat, and he carried water to the teams, and he chalked his columns, and no man looked twice. Down the beam came the loads, gross and tare and net. Down went Dunmore's paid numbers on the ticket, and beside them, on a slate divided down the middle, went the true ones. The numbers as Elias totaled them in his own head, honest as the beam should have read. The gap was the same every time. Roughly 4 pounds shorted on every hundredweight, plus the padded dockage. Every wagon, every farmer, the elevator's favor, load after load, quiet as breathing. He did not think of it as a plan. He had no plan. He was a boy writing down what was true, because the untrue thing sat there in front of him and would not leave him be. That was all it ever was. Then one market day the numbers moved. Dunmore had grown a little careful, the way a man does when a rumor has brushed past him. He touched the poise. Just a hair, a shaved reading, thinner than before. Thinking that if anyone ever did check his book against the beam, a smaller gap would be harder to swear to. He did it between wagons, quick, when the platform was busy. No grown man saw. No grown man ever saw anything on that platform. Elias saw. He saw the poise sit a thread further along than it had all autumn. He did not say a word. He simply wrote it down, the new short, to the pound, and the day, and the hour of the change. Cyrus Dunmore had adjusted his own crooked scale to cover his tracks, and in doing so he had left one more track, and the boy on the dock logged it like all the rest. That was the week the bank posted the farm. The list went up in the window at the Cattlemen's and Farmers' Trust, 30 miles being no distance at all for bad news. The Boone place was on it, $610 due at first frost, and first frost 19 days off, and the leaves already turning, and the mornings already sharp. Amos Boone stood in front of that window a long time. He had brought good wheat. He knew he had. He had sweated a half section into that harvest, 11 years of it, and the pay had come up short again, and he could not for the life of him say why. Poor prices, they told him. Heavy dockage. The third year the price of wheat had gone the wrong way. He believed it because a man has to believe something, and blaming the weather is easier than blaming a neighbor. He came home that night and told his wife they might sell the last team, the good team. And she turned away so he wouldn't see her face, and Elias sat in the corner with his slate and heard every word. The boy knew where the $610 had gone. He knew it to the pound. It had gone up the beam and into Cyrus Dunmore's book, 4 pounds at a time, over 11 years. He knew. And he could not make the words come out to say it, and the one grown man in the county who could carry the words had already been laughed out of a lawyer's office. He tried that night to tell his father. "The scale," Elias said. "Papa, the scale is wrong." Amos Boone was tired and ashamed and 30 miles past patience. "Don't," he said. "Not you too. I've got the bank in the window and the frost coming, and I don't need my own boy talking about the scale like the schoolteachers got him wound up." He rubbed his face. "Go to bed, Elias. Papa, stop pretending to be smart." It came out louder than he meant. It hung in the little kitchen. "Just stop. Go wait by the truck when we go to town, and let me settle things like a man. You embarrass us. Do you understand? You embarrass me." He would spend the rest of his life wishing those words back. Elias did not argue. He never argued. He went silent the way he always went silent when the world pressed him. And the harder it pressed, the quieter he got, and he took his slate to bed and lay in the dark holding the whole crooked truth of it against his chest like something warm. The proof existed, and no one with any standing would look at it. That was the bottom. That was the all is lost, if you want to call it that. A boy who could not speak, a woman with no standing, a father who'd forbidden the whole subject, a lawyer who'd laughed, and 19 days on the clock. And then the lever turned. Ada Pruitt heard it at the Mercantile, the way you hear everything, over a barrel of nails. Harlan Voss was coming. Harlan Voss was the state sealer of weights and measures. Every fall he made his round, 30, 40 towns, a slow wagon and a set of iron standards, and the full authority of the state of Kansas behind him. He tested scales, elevator beams, butcher scales, cotton scales, all of it. He set his certified weights on a man's balance, and if it did not read true. The state of Kansas had something to say about it. He was oiling his wagon 2 counties east. Ash Grove was on his list. He would be here inside the week. Ada stood by the barrel of nails and felt the whole thing turn over in her chest. Here, at last, was a man of standing. Not a friend of Dunmore's, not a man who owed the elevator anything. A neutral instrument, with iron in his wagon that answered to no one. The one witness in the whole affair who could not be laughed off the platform, because his authority did not depend on believing a boy. It depended only on the beam. And the beam would not lie to Harlan Voss. She was waiting at the edge of town the day his wagon came up the road. He was an unhurried man with a gray mustache and eyes that had looked at 1,000 scales and trusted none of them on sight. She walked beside his wheel and she talked, and this time she did not lead with the boy. She led with the beam. "I'm not asking you to believe anybody," she said. "I'm asking you to do what you came to do. Set your standards on the meridian beam. In front of the town. That's all. If it reads true, I'll have wasted your afternoon and I'll beg your pardon. If it doesn't," she let it sit. Harlan Voss chewed that a while. He tested scales for a living. A schoolteacher asking him to test one was no strange thing. And there was something in the way she said it, steady, specific, unafraid, that a man who spent his life among honest and dishonest weights had learned to notice. "Public test," he said. Market day. Market day. Who worked out that it was off? And here Ada Pruitt made the choice that would decide everything. She could have said herself. She could have kept the slow boy's name out of it, given the town no reason to laugh. She said, "A boy named Elias Boone. 17. The town calls him Simple." She looked Voss in the eye. "He's the finest mind for figures I have ever taught. And he can tell you the weight of an empty wagon before your poise settles. Ask him to. See for yourself." Harlan Voss did not laugh. That was the first thing that told her it might work. He only nodded, slow, and said, "We'll see." Market day came bright and cold, the last of the good weather before the frost, and the platform at Meridian Grain filled up the way it always did. 9 wagons, and then more. Tom Wheeler, 70 years old, come to sell the tail end of his crop off the best watered quarter in the township, still stung from the load that had made him near weep in front of everyone. A dozen farmers and better. And Amos Boone, at the back, hat in his hands, come to settle his own account and pray it covered enough of the note to matter. Cyrus Dunmore was at his beam, easy as ever, 11 years the master of that platform. Then the state wagon rolled up the road, and the crowd turned, and Harlan Voss climbed down with his iron. Dunmore's face did not change much. He'd been through certification rounds before. His scale had always passed, because the men who came before had set the weights and read the beam and gone home to supper. And none of them had thought to wonder if the beam itself was the lie. Voss was just another one, far as Dunmore knew. He came forward, hand out all elevator manager warmth. "Mr. Voss, we're honored. Clean scale here, you'll find. Cleanest in the county." "I expect I will," said Voss. "Let's have a look." He did not take the hand for long. He went to his wagon and he brought back his standards. 5 of them. Sealed iron, 50 pounds each, stamped by the state of Kansas, 250 pounds of certified truth that answered to no man on that platform. He set them on the dock with a sound the whole crowd felt in their teeth. And in the corner of Dunmore's office, though only Elias knew to think of it, sat 5 more just like them, the elevator's own sealed standards. Gathering dust, the ones that had never once been set against the beam they were meant to check. Voss cleared the platform beam. He checked the poise sat at 0. Empty. He looked it over. Professional. Unhurried. Then he began to lay his 50-pound standards on, one at a time, and read the beam as he went. The crowd went quiet the way a crowd does when it doesn't yet know what it's watching but knows it's something. 50 pounds. Voss read the beam. His face did nothing. 100. He read it again. 150. 200. 250 pounds of certified state iron sitting on Cyrus Dunmore's platform beam. And the beam read light. Voss straightened up slow. 250 on the pan, he said, loud enough to carry. And your beam wants to call it less. He looked at the poise. He looked at Dunmore. By a fair piece. The platform stirred. Dunmore laughed, but it came out a half-second late. Your weights have been in a wagon all week, sir, iron shifts. My beam's been sealed 2 years. My weights were sealed by the state of Kansas last month, said Voss, and iron does not shift. He wasn't warm anymore. Your beam's off true. It's been reading light on a full pan, which means every man who sold through here got paid for less than he brought. He let that land. Then he turned and looked out over the crowd and said, I'm told there's a young fellow here who could have saved me the trouble of finding that out. He found Ada in the crowd. She was looking at the dock. There sat Elias Boone, 17 years old, on the edge of the loading platform where he always sat, a cracked school slate across his knees, chalk in his hand, not looking up. Son, said Voss. You Elias Boone? The boy looked up. They tell me you know your weights. Voss gestured at the row of empty wagons waiting up the ramp. Pick one. Empty. Tell me what my true beam's going to read when I tear it, before I run it up. The platform held its breath. A dozen faces, and Dunmore's among them, waiting for the simple boy to fail in front of God and everybody. Elias looked at the wagons. He looked a good while. He was not slow. He was only careful. His eyes moved down the line and settled on Tom Wheeler's rig, the old high-sided wagon he had watched come across that beam 100 times. That one, Elias said. Quiet. Flat, the way he'd said the scales wrong the day they walked him to the road. Empty. 1140. He said it before the wagon moved. 1,140 pounds. To the pound. They ran it up the ramp. Voss himself worked the poise, on his own corrected reading, his own certified iron balancing the beam. The crowd leaned in. The poise slid, and settled, and stopped. 1,140 pounds. Nobody laughed. Voss looked at the beam a long moment. Then he looked at the boy on the dock, and something moved in his weathered face. Something like a man who has spent 30 years among instruments finally meeting a better one. Son, he said, and his voice had gone careful. How did you know that? Elias didn't gloat. He wouldn't have known how. He didn't say a word, because the words never came when he needed them and he had long since stopped waiting on them. He held out the slate. Voss came and took it. He looked down at the columns, the honest weights, and beside them Dunmore's paid weights, and the gap between, load after load after load, all in a careful chalk hand. He turned it over. There was more on the back. He turned it back. You wrote all these down, he said, as they came across. Elias nodded. To the pound. Elias nodded. Harlan Voss stood there on that platform with a slow boy's slate in his 2 hands. And he understood that he was holding the most complete record of an elevator fraud he had seen in 30 years on the road, and that it had been compiled in chalk by a 17-year-old the whole town had written off, sitting in plain sight not 10 feet from the man who robbed them. He turned to Cyrus Dunmore. "Your tear book," he said. Now, Dunmore's warmth was gone. His face had gone the color of tallow. "You've no cause. I've got a certified beam that reads light and a state seal that says I can look at any record touching this scale." Voss took a step. "Your tear book. Or I'll have the sheriff hand it to me, and that'll look worse." The book came out. A farmer near the office fetched it and passed it hand to hand, and it came to Voss, and Voss set it on the dock beside the boy's slate, and the two records lay there side by side in the cold sunlight for the whole town to see. Then they read it aloud. Voss read the elevator's numbers, and Coulter, the county attorney, sent for the moment the beam read light, arriving flushed and out of breath. Coulter read the boys, the very figures he'd waved off his desk as chalk. The same figures, line for line. They started with Tom Wheeler. Wheeler Thomas, Voss read from the book. Load of the 14th. Tear recorded 1181. He looked at the slate. Boys got the empty wagon at 1140. 41 pounds, said Coulter, and his voice was not soft now, and he did not look soft. 41 pounds of tear that was never there. On one load. Tom Wheeler stood in the crowd with his old hands at his sides. He had come near to weeping on this platform once, in front of these same men, and been told it was poor grain and heavy dockage, and gone home believing his own fields had failed him. Now he heard the true number read out under the state seal. He put his hand over his mouth. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Every man there had settled up at that beam, and every man there was doing the same arithmetic Wheeler was doing, all at once, in a terrible silence. And then, it wasn't one man. That was the thing. Voss and Coulter went down the book, and the boys' slate matched it turn for turn. And the names came off the page one after another. This farmer, that farmer. This harvest, the one before. 4 pounds shorted on every hundredweight, plus the dockage rounded up, plus the beam itself set light beneath it all, 3 cheats stacked one on the other, working together, every load, for years. Name after name. Each man's paragraph read out where he stood. Each man watching a piece of his life get counted back to him. They ran it out to the end. 7 harvests deep, as far as the book went. And when Coulter totaled the shorted pounds and turned them into money at 60 pounds to the bushel and the going price, the number he read out over that platform landed like a dropped stone. About $14,600. Stolen from the farmers of Ashgrove and the country around it, 4 pounds at a time, over 7 years, off a scale they'd all trusted with their living. $14,600. And 610 of it, give or take, had come off a half section belonging to a man standing at the back of the crowd with his hat in his hands. Now Cyrus Dunmore's turn came, and it came the way those things come, not with a fight, but with a slow collapse of everything the man had been built on. First the contempt. Old habit. He drew himself up and he found the line that had worked for 11 years. The line that had walked a boy to the road, and he threw it out over the platform one last time. "You'd take a simpleton's arithmetic," he said, "over the word of a certified manager? A boy who can't count his own fingers, chalking on a broken slate? That's your evidence?" He looked around for the 12 men who used to chuckle. Nobody chuckled. Harlan Voss did not argue with him. He didn't raise his voice. He walked to the platform beam. The beam with 250 pounds of state iron still sitting on the pan reading light, and he laid one finger on it and he tapped it. Once, twice, the sound carried. "The boy's arithmetic," Voss said, "matches this beam to the pound. And this beam is a lie." So, he took his finger away. "I'll take his arithmetic, Mr. Dunmore, and so will the state of Kansas." That was when the contempt broke, and the bargaining came up under it. Now let's be reasonable men. Dunmore's voice climbed. There's been errors. I'll grant errors. Any elevator has errors. I'll make it right. I'll settle any account that's short, quiet, no need for. He was moving now, hands out. Toward Coulter, toward Voss, toward anybody. No need to make a circus of it. We can sit down. The three of us, said Coulter and every farmer in that book. And then even the bargaining died, because Dunmore looked at the crowd, at Wheeler, with his hand still at his mouth, at the hard, quiet faces of men who had just learned where their years had gone, and he saw there was no reasonable man on that platform he could talk around. There was only the beam, and the book, and the slate, and the boy, and the iron. He went quiet. At the last, Cyrus Dunmore, who had run his mouth over that platform for 11 years, could not find one more word. The sheriff had come up during the reading. He took Dunmore by the arm, not rough, and turned him, and walked him down his own loading ramp and off his own platform. Past the wagons and the waiting teams, and the whole town watched him go, and not a soul said a thing. No blow was struck, no voice was raised past Coulter reading a total. The numbers were the sentence. They had always been the sentence. It had only taken a man with iron in his wagon and no reason to lie to let them be read. Restitution was ordered off the elevator's accounts and its bond. Coulter moving fast now. Fast as he'd been slow before. The way a man does when he's ashamed of himself and looking to be seen setting it right. It would take months. It would take the courts. But it was real. And it was written, and it would come. And through all of it, Elias Boone sat on the edge of the dock with his hands empty now, his slate in the hands of the state of Kansas, and looked at none of it, and said nothing, and waited the way he had always waited. His father came through the crowd. Amos Boone had heard the whole of it. He had heard the $610 named. He had heard where it went. He had heard his boy call an empty wagon to the pound in front of the man who'd robbed him, and hand over a slate that undid a fraud 11 years deep, and he had stood at the back with his hat crushed in his two hands and felt the ground go out from under everything he thought he'd known about his own son. He pushed up to the front. He came and stood in front of Elias. And Amos Boone, who had shamed the boy for the words he couldn't find, found that he couldn't find them either. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. The same silence, the very trait he'd called an embarrassment, closed over the father now when he needed most to speak, and maybe that was the moment he understood his boy at last, that the quiet was never empty. That a man can be full to breaking and still have no way to let it out. So he did what his son would have done. He put his hand flat on the slate lying there between them, the cracked school slate, the columns of chalk. He held it there a moment. Then he lifted his hand and put it on the boy's shoulder. "I'm sorry, son," he said. It was all he had. "I'm sorry." Elias looked at him. Then Elias just nodded. That was all. He nodded, the way he nodded at everything true. And he let his father's hand stay on his shoulder. And the two of them sat there in the cold sun while the crowd broke up around them and the state wagon's iron got loaded back up and the long business of setting things right began. The Boone's share of the restitution covered the $610 note with room to spare. The posting came down out of the window at the Cattlemen's and Farmers' Trust. The good team stayed in the barn. First frost came, 19 days on schedule, white on the stubble in the gray morning, and the Boone place met it paid up and whole on a half-section a boy's memory had saved. The spring after, the elevator ran under new management, and it ran honest. You could stand on that same platform on a market day and watch it. Wagons up the ramp in the clean light. The beam true now, Harlan Voss had seen to that himself, set it right against his standards before he left, and it read what a load weighed and nothing else. Farmers weighing out and settling up and reading the ticket in the sun, and no man going home wondering why the pay came short. Because it didn't come short anymore. And the books of the Meridian elevator were kept by a quiet young man who chalked his columns in a careful hand, right out in the open, at a table by the door where anybody could see them. Elias Boone kept the elevator's books. The town that had said he couldn't count his fingers paid him to count its wheat. He still didn't say much. He still carried water to the teams without being asked, and still knew the name of every farmer's children, and still, for the pleasure of it, chalked long columns of figures that added up to nothing but the joy of watching them come out even. Only now, when he set a number down, grown men leaned in to read it. Ada Pruitt went back to her school. She was still not 30. She taught her rows of farm children their sums, and when one of them was slow to speak or looked at the world a beat longer than the others before answering, she was patient in a way she might not have been, once. The cracked slate hangs on the wall of that schoolhouse to this day, they say. Beside it a small hand-lettered sign, and the sign gives no speech and no sermon. It reads only the honest weight of a bushel of wheat, 60 pounds. That's all. Anybody's child can check it. As for Cyrus Dunmore, he never ran a scale again in the state of Kansas. And the town of Ashgrove, which had a word for the Boone boy, learned that it had held the wrong word all along. He was never simple. He was only quiet, in a place that mistook noise for sense, and it took a crooked beam and a set of state weights and a schoolteacher who wouldn't quit to teach a whole county the difference. The mind they'd pitied had been the sharpest among them the whole time, sitting on the dock, carrying water, missing nothing. Respect, it turns out, is not always earned in words. Sometimes it's just written down, careful and true, and set out in the light where at last the right man stops to read it. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever underestimated the quiet one in your family? I'd like to know. And if this story found you, stay a while. There's more where it came from.